The fall of Constantinople. How a weakened Roman capital resisted for nearly 8 weeks, and why Mehmed II finally broke through in 1453. Constantinople stood where the modern city of Istanbul, Turkey, stands today. The Bosporus is the narrow waterway between Europe and Asia that links the Black Sea to the Mediterranean world. The city occupied a peninsula, with water protecting 3 sides and its main land approach facing west. That geography made it a natural fortress, a busy meeting place for merchants, and a strategic checkpoint between seas and continents. Anyone controlling Constantinople could watch ships and influence movement through one of the world's most valuable crossings. The site was not new. An older Greek settlement called Byzantium had stood there for centuries. In 330 CE, Roman Emperor Constantine I transformed it into a new imperial capital. People called it Constantinople, meaning the city of Constantine, although other names also remained in use. Constantine chose a place that was easier to defend than many older capitals and closer to the empire's rich eastern provinces and dangerous frontiers. The city soon filled with palaces, government offices, churches, public monuments, markets, and people drawn from across the Roman world. When imperial rule disappeared in Western Europe during the 5th century, the Roman government in the East continued from Constantinople. Modern historians normally call this state the Byzantine Empire, but its people usually called themselves Romans. Their everyday language increasingly became Greek, and Christianity shaped public life, yet they believed their emperor and institutions continued the Roman imperial tradition. That is why the event in 1453 was more than the loss of one medieval city. Constantinople's location made it valuable even when its empire became weak. Ships passing between the Black Sea and Mediterranean traveled through nearby waters. Roads from southeastern Europe and Anatolia met around the city. Merchants traded grain, textiles, metals, spices, and luxury goods, while emperors used the capital to collect taxes, receive ambassadors, and command armies. Geography did not mean Constantinople controlled every shipment at every moment, but it gave rulers an extraordinary base from which to influence trade and military movement. Constantinople's weakness in 1453 had deep roots. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade was diverted from its original purpose and attacked Constantinople. Western Christian crusaders captured and looted the Christian Byzantine capital, carrying away wealth, damaging buildings, and establishing a Western-ruled Latin empire. Byzantine forces recovered the city in 1261, but recovery did not restore the old empire. Territory had fragmented, finances were strained, and Italian commercial powers such as Venice and Genoa controlled much Mediterranean trade. The disaster of 1204 also deepened mistrust between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christians. The Theodosian walls formed a deep land defense system of ditch, outer wall, inner wall, towers, and guarded gates. An attacker first had to cross open ground in the ditch, then survive missiles and counterattacks while trying to climb or break several defensive layers. The inner wall rose above the outer defenses, allowing defenders to fight from different heights. These fortifications had helped Constantinople survive many earlier attacks. Their reputation gave the people of 1453 a reasonable hope. Even if Mehmed had more soldiers, a narrow breach could prevent him from using all of them at once. The walls enclosed the outline of a giant capital, but the society behind them had shrunk. War, political disorder, territorial losses, economic decline, and outbreaks of plague all reduced the city's population. Estimates vary, but perhaps 30,000 to 50,000 people lived there in 1453, far fewer than during its greatest centuries. Large spaces inside the ancient circuit contained gardens, fields, ruins, and abandoned buildings. Constantinople still possessed famous churches and formidable defenses, but it no longer had the tax base, population, or military reserves that had once supported those monuments. The Ottomans began as one of several Turkish principalities in Anatolia, most of modern Turkey. Their ruling house took its name from Osman, an early leader. From the late 13th century onward, Ottoman rulers captured territory in Anatolia and southeastern Europe. A major step came after 1354, when Ottoman forces gained a lasting foothold around Gallipoli on the European side of the Dardanelles. Their capital eventually moved to Edirne, northwest of Constantinople. The Byzantine capital was no longer facing a distant raider. During the late 14th and early 15th centuries, Constantinople increasingly resembled an island of Byzantine territory inside Ottoman lands. Sultan Bayezid I pressured the city for years beginning in 1394, although crisis within the Ottoman state prevented conquest. Another siege failed in 1422. Those survivals strengthened faith in the walls, but they also showed how exposed the capital had become. A few Byzantine territories survived elsewhere, including the Mora in southern Greece, yet they could not easily rescue the city. Mehmed II was the Ottoman sultan who organized and commanded the final siege. He first became sultan as a child, lost the throne when his father returned, and became ruler again in 1451. He was only 21 when Constantinople fell, but calling him merely an inexperienced teenager is misleading. He had received an elite education, understood court politics, and had already learned that powerful commanders and rivals could challenge a young ruler. Capturing Constantinople offered military advantage and enormous prestige. Mehmed's motives were connected. Constantinople sat between Ottoman territories in Europe and Anatolia, making it a potential base for enemies or rival claimants to his throne. Its harbor and position offered strategic influence over shipping. Its Roman imperial history made it a magnificent capital for a ruler with universal ambitions. Conquest also carried religious prestige in the Muslim world and would strengthen Mehmed's authority inside his own state. No single motive explains everything. In 1452, Mehmed built Rumeli Hisari on the European shore of the Bosporus, north of Constantinople. An older Ottoman fortress, Anadolu Hisari, stood across the water on the Asian side. Together they allowed Ottoman guns and patrols to challenge ships moving through the narrow channel. The fortress did not create a perfectly sealed barrier, but it made supply voyages much more dangerous and demonstrated that preparations were serious. Constantine XI Palaiologos was the last Byzantine emperor and the leader of Constantinople's defense. He had ruled since 1449 and understood that his resources were painfully limited. He sought help from Western rulers, repaired defenses, gathered supplies, and assigned commanders to critical positions. Mehmed offered terms that would have allowed Constantine to leave with another domain, but the emperor refused to surrender the capital. Later writers placed dramatic speeches in his mouth, and the exact wording cannot be verified. Giovanni Giustiniani was an experienced Genoese commander placed over the most threatened land defenses. He arrived with several hundred well-equipped men and became one of Constantine's most important partners. Other Genoese, Venetians, Catalans, Cretans, sailors, monks, and local civilians also helped. Medieval numbers are often exaggerated, but a common modern estimate gives the defenders roughly 7,000 fighting men, including about 2,000 foreigners, against an Ottoman force many times larger. The defense was therefore a coalition. Western governments had competing interests and sent no relief force large enough to break the siege. The main siege began on April 6, 1453. Ottoman numbers are disputed, but modern estimates often place the fighting force around 50,000 to 80,000, supported by laborers, sailors, engineers, miners, artillery crews, cavalry, and supply units. Constantine had only several thousand defenders for kilometers of land and sea walls. Janissaries were elite infantry serving the Ottoman Sultan, but they were only one part of Mehmed's army. The Ottomans also positioned ships around the city. Cannons were not new in 1453, but Mehmed assembled artillery on an unusual scale. A gun founder known as Orban or Urban helped produce a famous giant bombard capable of firing enormous stone balls. That weapon attracted attention, yet smaller guns were often more useful because they could fire more frequently. The Theodosian walls had been designed long before powerful gunpowder artillery, when attackers relied mainly on ladders, rams, siege towers, and stone-throwing machines. The popular image of one giant cannon instantly destroying Constantinople is wrong. Heavy bombards were slow, difficult to move, and vulnerable to mechanical problems. More importantly, the defenders repaired what the artillery damaged. After daytime bombardment, crews worked through the night, packing breaches with earth, timber, stone, barrels, brush, and rubble. Earth could absorb cannon impact better than a thin stone face. The next day, Ottoman guns struck again. This cycle mattered because Constantinople could survive individual blows, but its small garrison could not rest. A better picture is that the cannons cracked a shield without automatically defeating the person holding it. Ottoman infantry still had to approach breaches under fire, climb over rubble, and fight defenders at close range. Engineers had to maintain roads, gun positions, trenches, and supplies. Miners attempted to tunnel under defenses. Ships pressured the sea approaches. Meanwhile, the defenders repaired walls and launched countermeasures. The conquest, therefore, cannot be credited to a single superweapon. The Golden Horn was the long inlet beside Constantinople that served as the city's protected harbor. Defenders stretched a heavy chain across its entrance, with one end near the city and the other near the Genoese settlement of Galata. Friendly vessels could be admitted, while hostile ships could not simply sail through. Armed ships waited behind the barrier. Control of this harbor mattered because the city's main land walls were already under enormous pressure. On April 20th, 4 Christian ships carrying grain, equipment, and men approached Constantinople. The larger Ottoman fleet tried to stop them, but the high-sided sailing ships fought through smaller vessels, and favorable winds eventually carried them toward the chain. People watched from the walls as the battle unfolded. When the ships entered the Golden Horn, the defenders gained supplies and a powerful morale boost. For Mehmed, the failure was humiliating, because his fleet had been unable to enforce the blockade in full view of both armies. Mehmed's answer became the siege's most famous maneuver. Around April 21st and 22nd, Ottoman crews moved dozens of smaller vessels from the Bosporus over land behind Galata and down into the upper Golden Horn. Sources describe a prepared route using timbers, rollers, tracks, grease, or some combination of them. The exact engineering details vary. The essential fact is clear: the Ottomans went around the chain instead of breaking through it. The ships did not appear by magic, and they did not capture the city by themselves. Once Ottoman vessels entered the Golden Horn, Constantinople's defenders faced a wider problem. The harborside walls were less formidable than the great western land walls, because the water had traditionally offered protection. Constantine now had to assign men to watch them, reducing the number available at the main breach zones. The Ottomans also built a floating bridge or platform across part of the harbor, helping move men and artillery. The naval maneuver did not produce immediate victory, but it forced a small garrison to guard more places. The siege became a contest of methods. Ottoman guns battered walls and infantry tested breaches. Miners dug tunnels intended to weaken fortifications or open a path beneath them. Defenders, aided by the engineer Johannes Grant, detected several mines, fought underground, flooded passages, or destroyed supports. Ottoman sailors kept pressure on the harbor while the blockade limited outside assistance. The defenders also attempted attacks on Ottoman ships and repaired damage constantly. Neither side relied on one plan. For much of April and May, the defenders kept stopping maimed. Assaults failed, mines were discovered, walls were patched, and 4 supply ships had broken the blockade. A long siege also carried risks for the Sultan. Disease, low morale, supply problems, or a foreign relief force could change the situation. Victory was not inevitable when the siege began. Yet time favored the Ottomans. Attrition means wearing an opponent down through repeated losses, fatigue, and pressure. Mehmed could rotate troops and replace casualties more easily. By late May, the western walls were badly damaged and the defenders were exhausted. Mehmed prepared one enormous assault. On May 28th, the Ottoman camp rested, organized weapons, and held religious observances. Inside Constantinople, defenders repaired breaches, joined processions, and gathered for worship, including a final service in Hagia Sophia remembered by later accounts. Tradition surrounds Constantine's last day with speeches whose wording is uncertain, so they should not be quoted as exact transcripts. What is certain is that both sides understood the next attack might decide the siege. Accounts describe repeated Ottoman assaults by different contingents, with fresh troops replacing those already committed. Some sources and modern reconstructions organize them into distinct waves ending with Janissary attacks, but the exact sequence is not perfectly certain. The most intense struggle centered on the damaged middle section of the western walls near the Lycus Valley, often called the Mesotitian. Narrow approaches still helped the defenders, and for a time they held. But every wave consumed arrows, strength, attention, and men. During the final fighting, Giovanni Giustiniani was seriously wounded. Historical accounts disagree about the weapon and exact location of the injury, but they agree that he withdrew from the walls. His men had trusted his experience, and his removal damaged morale in the most threatened sector. Constantine reportedly urged him to remain, but Giustiniani was carried toward the harbor and later died from his wound. The injury did not single-handedly cause the fall. Constantine XI stayed with the defense as Ottoman troops forced their way into the main positions. He died during the fighting, but no account provides a completely certain description of his final moments. Later stories say he removed imperial symbols and charged into battle, or that angels concealed him for a future return. Those traditions show how powerfully people remembered the last emperor, not exactly what happened. Historians separate later legend from the secure core. Constantine did not flee. He was not presented as a surviving prisoner, and the final Byzantine emperor died as organized resistance collapsed around him. A siege does not end the instant one soldier crosses a wall. The decisive change came when Ottoman troops secured enough damaged positions, towers, and approaches that the defenders could no longer restore a continuous line. Flags and troops appearing behind the defenses spread panic. Some fighters continued resisting, while others tried to reach ships or protect neighborhoods, but organized command broke apart. The city that had survived nearly 8 weeks of siege fell on the morning of Tuesday, May 29, 1453. Because Constantinople had been taken by assault rather than negotiated surrender, its inhabitants faced the brutal customs of medieval conquest. Ottoman troops killed some people, looted property, and captured many civilians and soldiers. Prisoners could be enslaved, ransomed, or redistributed. Precise casualty and captive totals vary sharply among surviving writers, so confident numbers are misleading. Many frightened people had gathered in churches, including Hagia Sophia, where captives were taken. Mehmed wanted the city as a capital and eventually brought uncontrolled looting to an end, but that later political goal did not erase the violence and captivity experienced during the conquest. A famous story says a small gate called the Kirkaporta was accidentally left open, allowing Ottoman soldiers to enter. One near-contemporary Greek account mentions such a gate, but other major accounts do not make it the decisive cause, and historians debate its location and importance. Even if troops used a poorly guarded opening, Constantinople was already under a huge assault with damaged walls and collapsing positions. The safest conclusion is not that someone simply forgot to close a door. Hagia Sophia had served for centuries as Constantinople's great cathedral and a symbol of Eastern Roman Christianity. After the conquest, Mehmed ordered it converted for Muslim worship. Christian furnishings and practices were altered over time, while the enormous building itself was preserved and adapted as an imperial mosque. The conversion carried a clear public meaning. The city now belonged to an Ottoman Muslim ruler. Yet Hagia Sophia also linked Mehmed's new capital to the prestige of the Roman and Byzantine past. Mehmed had not conquered Constantinople merely to leave ruins. He made it an Ottoman capital and began restoring population, markets, water systems, religious institutions, and government. Authorities encouraged or compelled people from different parts of the empire to settle there, including Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Jews, merchants, and craftspeople. This policy, sometimes called suagun, could involve forced relocation as well as opportunity. Community received places of worship and forms of organization under Ottoman rule. The popular image of Mehmed changing a sign from Constantinople to Istanbul on the day of conquest is false. Ottoman documents used names such as Constantini, while speakers had long used other forms connected with the city, including versions that developed into Istanbul. Greeks, Europeans, and Ottoman subjects continued using different names for centuries. The Ottoman state made Constantinople its capital, but naming changed gradually through ordinary speech, administration, languages, and later national policy. In the 20th century, the Turkish Republic standardized Istanbul internationally. There was no single cause. The Byzantine state had too little territory, money, population, and manpower after centuries of loss. Mehmed commanded a larger empire able to provide soldiers, ships, engineers, cannon, food, and replacements. Artillery repeatedly damaged defenses, while naval maneuver widened the front. Western volunteers helped bravely, but no large relief army or fleet arrived. Finally, nearly 8 weeks of attrition left the garrison exhausted. Giustinian's wound hurt morale, and Ottoman troops seized the battered positions. Constantinople did not prove that old walls had become useless overnight. Its defenses resisted heavy bombardment for nearly 8 weeks. It did show that rulers could no longer rely on tall stone barriers alone. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, engineers increasingly designed lower, thicker fortifications backed by earth, with angled bastions that could support cannon and reduce vulnerable dead ground. This development took decades and had many causes, but 1453 became a famous demonstration of gunpowder siege power. The lesson was not simply that cannon always win. After 1453, Constantinople became the political and cultural center of a rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. Sultans built palaces, mosques, schools, markets, baths, and charitable complexes. Orthodox Christian institutions continued under Ottoman authority, Jewish communities grew, and merchants connected the capital to Europe, the Black Sea, the Middle East, and North Africa. The city's identity changed profoundly, but its earlier history did not disappear. Ottoman rulers reused buildings, roads, water systems, ceremonial spaces, and the prestige of Roman imperial rule. In an important sense, 1453 ended the Roman Empire because the government at Constantinople had always considered itself Roman. Byzantine successor territories in the Mora and Trebizond survived until 1460 and 1461, but no emperor again ruled from Constantinople. The conquest strengthened Ottoman expansion and shocked Christian Europe. Greek scholars and books did move west, yet Byzantine learning had influenced Italy before 1453, so the fall did not single-handedly cause the Renaissance. Ottoman rule also did not simply close every Asian trade route. European-Ottoman trade continued. Memory lock. Constantinople was the Eastern Roman capital beside the Bosporus. Its layered walls and protected harbor made it difficult to conquer, but the Byzantine state behind those defenses had become small and isolated. Mehmed II combined artillery, a large supplied army, naval maneuver, engineering, and repeated attacks. The defenders resisted for nearly 8 weeks. On May 29, 1453, damaged walls, exhausted troops, Giustinian's wound, and continuing Ottoman pressure finally broke coordinated resistance. Knowledge check. Why was Constantinople's location so valuable? Think about it. The answer is, it stood beside the Bosporus between Europe and Asia, linking major seas, roads, trade, and military routes. Knowledge check. Why are the people of the Byzantine Empire also called Romans? Think about it. The answer is, they considered their state the continuing Roman Empire and usually identified themselves as Romans. Knowledge check. Why could the Theodosian walls resist a much larger army? Think about it. The answer is, their ditch, layered walls, towers, and narrow breach zones prevented attackers from using all their numbers at once. Knowledge check. Why was the Byzantine state so vulnerable by 1453? Think about it. The answer is, it had lost most territory, population, money, military reserves, and dependable outside support. Knowledge check. What did Rumeli Hisari help Mehmed control? Think about it. The answer is, it tightened Ottoman control of shipping through the Bosporus and made supplying Constantinople more dangerous. Knowledge check. Why did Can not win the siege by themselves? Think about it. The answer is, defenders repaired breaches, so artillery still needed infantry, engineers, ships, logistics, numbers, and time. Knowledge check. Why did moving ships into the Golden Horn matter? Think about it. The answer is, it bypassed the chain and forced Constantinople's small garrison to defend a wider front. Knowledge check. Why was Giustinian's wound a turning point? Think about it. The answer is, his withdrawal hurt morale at a critical wall sector, while exhausted defenders faced fresh Ottoman attacks. Knowledge check. Did an open Kirkaport gate single-handedly cause the fall? Think about it. The answer is, no. The gate story is disputed, while the main defenses were already collapsing under a large assault. Knowledge check. What is the best overall explanation for the fall? Think about it. The answer is, Byzantine weakness met Ottoman resources, artillery, naval adaptation, isolation, attrition, and a decisive final assault.